Us to order. This is the CCS Budget and Finance Committee meeting of Monday, April 15th, 2024. The time is now 1:30 p.m. Beth, may we have a roll call, please?
Austin?
Here.
DiDonato?
Here.
Dombrowski?
Here.
Jacobson?
Here.
Jakacki?
Here.
Todd?
Here.
For CCS, we have Rebecca Malinowski and Beth Stonebrenner.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Are there any additions to our agenda? All right, seeing none, then let's move on to public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak? Good. Okay, moving on. Our first item of business this afternoon is the review and approval of the minutes from the March 22nd, I'm sorry, it says 22nd. The minutes say the 24th.
Oh boy.
It's the 24th.
The minutes also, I hit it out of the park apparently. I swapped the time for the meeting time of 10 o'clock and the actual start time of 10:06. So if we can, I can correct the time and the date apparently.
Sure, we'll do that.
I was at the meeting too.
All right, so we'll mark Jim as being present and we'll make those updates. Are there any other updates or corrections to the minutes? All right, a little bit out of order on my Robert's rules here, but do I have a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
Dombrowski moves.
Is there a second?
I will second.
All right, so I've got Dombrowski and DiDonato. May we have a roll call, please?
Austin?
Yes.
DiDonato?
Yes.
Dombrowski?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jakacki?
Yes.
Todd?
Here. Yes.
Okay. All right. So the next item on our agenda is the review of the latest iteration of the fiscal year 24-25 budget. And I'm going to hand this over to Rebecca.
Thank you. So I sent a link to, I've got a lot of windows. I sent a link to several different documents, one of which was a summary of kind of the updates made between last meeting and this meeting. So if it's okay with you, Anthony, I'd like to talk through both the budget and the billing information and make sure we take any questions and address them before we take action, since they are so related.
Yep.
So an update on the beginning balance section. Because of the changes in GASB reporting around leases and technology contracts, our beginning balance, like our fund balances, look a lot different than they did previously. So I had noted in the document that we had a question out to the accountant, and they confirmed that, like, yes, we should use the audited balances, which makes sense. So the what was in the document I sent out to you is not accurate. I have here the updated balances, both for the audited 22-23 year start and year end, as well as then the projected like actual beginning balance for this year. So it doesn't change anything in terms of our expenditures. And it doesn't obviously change our cash on hand. It really reflects that a lot of our like bank account balance essentially would be tied up in, for example, the lease if we needed to terminate. Looking at all of our expenses, by the end of this year, we anticipate a final operating fund balance of $740,000, which is right in line with our ending balance guidelines. So if we're looking at the previous year's expenditures, we want to be between 25 and 50%, which we have the ranges here on my screen. So we're within that range without making any transfers to or from the development account, the development fund. It does further, then looking forward, you know, when we're thinking about where we want our development fund balance to be, or our operating fund balance to be at the end of next year, that kind of brings into question these two different potential member billing amounts. So this balance here looks at keeping our overall library billings even from last year to this year, which does have us running at a small deficit. To be running flat, we'd want to bill $1.9 million as opposed to this 1.82. But even with that deficit, you can see we end with our final balance pretty close to the middle, a little bit more in that lower level of our desired fund balance. I like this option if we are also thinking about the OCLC billing component. I want to stop here before we get into other budget updates and kind of OCLC stuff. Are there questions about why the fund balances have changed? Anything in that area?
I think we've all been through the audit process and are familiar about what those changes are. But I don't want to make that assumption. Is everyone good with that? Okay.
So OCLC billings here, this is an estimate, but it does include adding Mount Prospect and Waukegan into our group billing. We'll get those final numbers hopefully before July, but I think last year we got it pretty late in the year. And so once we get those, we'll update the board. I want to talk about personnel since that was a big topic last meeting. So these numbers include keeping the personnel budget flat from this current year to next year. As we discussed at our last meeting, we do have room to change it, but that may hamstring us in the future if we need to make changes, perhaps again to our IT staffing. That is another reason that I'm comfortable with keeping the lower billing amount and running at a small deficit, because I do think we will be, 4 to 6% under budget in this personnel line, which would give us a cushion. Like, I don't want to focus on building up an operating balance when we're probably going to end up under budget anyway. Beth and I took a look at insurance benefits, both the plans that we're offering as well as our coverage rates. Love the timing. There was a discussion on the director's list that I'm sure you all saw, and Beth also gathered some data from other HR source members, and we are really competitive in our insurance premium coverage for our staff. So I'm not proposing any changes to that. Again, as a reminder, we cover 90% of the individual's premium and then 75% of the total of any other premium. So previously we had a formula where it was like we cover like 90% of the individual regardless of what plan they're on, and then like an additional component for family. But right now it's just 90% of individual, 75% of family. Or whichever of those plans. So again, both within library and in the private sector, we're really competitive here. So I did not propose any changes. What I did increase, which you can see from the last time we talked, is the personal equipment reimbursement. So our staff really do like working from home. And at this time, we do not provide, outside of providing a laptop, we don't provide equipment for our staff to work at home. Our reimbursement policy is that we cover a flat rate for all staff that is meant to cover a portion of their cell phone and internet. So my proposal here as an added benefit to staff in this time where we have a little wiggle room is to increase the personal equipment reimbursement to allow for a small annual stipend that staff could say like, oh, I want to upgrade and get a new monitor or a new mouse. And because we haven't been allowing those expenses to come in through reimbursement. So that would benefit all staff and give them the flexibility of making the purchase that is going to be most helpful in their specific office. And, easily allow them to go, if they want something more than the reimbursement we're offering, easily allow them to cover it without additional paperwork from us. Comments on salary, questions, feedback?
What did you decide the raises were going to be again?
So we had budgeted for 4.5% increases.
Okay.
Okay, hearing no questions. We'll jump to the development fund. This was not updated when we last met. So our spending in these areas, we had budgeted $77,000 for Vega. I think we talked at the last meeting, unless it was executive committee. I'm not recommending that with the expiration of our contract coming up in 2026, I think it would be foolish for us to move forward going live with Vega, rather than wrapping everything into a contract negotiation. And again, next year we'll be looking at various discovery interfaces as part of our analysis leading up to renewal. So I'm not anticipating spending that $77,000 this year. I'm looking at this number and wondering if it's a typo. Just that it's so high over budget. Beth, do you
The site improvement?
think I did? Yeah. Do you think I made it? Do you think that should be a 15?
I believe so. I feel like we would know if we were that
I'm like,
far over, right?
okay.
I'm hoping.
Yeah. No, that's one of my favorite typos is flipping the top
That
and
was
bottom rows.
that was
of-
some expensive coffee I bought, maybe. But no, I think it's
Yeah.
a 15. I
Okay.
think you're correct.
Okay. And then geez Louise, Rebecca, the rail support grant, again, we'll be spending out what we've took in. So despite my cool typos there, no oddities coming up. We have the award grant amount for next year already. So that is listed here. And the difference from last year to this year is that this special software is Find More Illinois. And so our expenditure for the rail support grant rebate has been reduced to cover the cost of Find More Illinois, as we discussed at governing board. So nobody will be billed for Find More. And the support grant will still be distributed using the same formula, but at this lower amount. And that still leaves us with both this year and next year, a healthy fund balance in the development fund without any transfers. You do see here a new line that reflects taking in e-commerce payments from non-CCS libraries. So we anticipated it would be a pretty nominal amount based on history. And again, especially if we look at $3,000 divided by across all of our libraries, I don't feel like we're taking a significant amount of funds from members by having online payment set up this way. Questions in this area?
What interest rate are you getting
Okay.
for your for this fund?
Could you say that again?
Your interest rates? I see that you got interest at 25,000. Are you getting like 5%?
It was,
Yeah,
we were just looking
Yeah,
at somewhere
between-
between 4 and 5.
4 and 5.
Like-
Yeah.
Is like Illinois funds or whatever the Wintrust thing where they match the Illinois funds?
Yes.
So it's like 5.5 right now, 5.3 or something. So you're assuming that there's gonna be a couple drops. Okay. I was just curious. 25,000 seems like a good number to me, but I was just curious.
Interest. Yeah, I just I mean,
Who knows? 25,000 seems
Yeah.
safe.
yes. So yeah, we got more than we budgeted for last year. I'd love to see it continue at the same rate, but shrugs all around on what the economy will do.
I just want to make sure you didn't have it invested in like CDs or something like that. And
Oh, no. No, we're invested. The bulk of our funds are in the Wintrust Max Safe account. And then we do have funds in Illinois funds as well. So they have roughly the same performance as you indicated, Wintrust matches.
yeah, that's pretty good.
Okay, then are there questions on any other sections of the budget? A few things were tweaked, but there were no major changes from the last time we spoke. Okay, then I will switch over to member billing. My spreadsheet was getting a little unwieldy this year. So Summary A and CCS membership A go together, and Summary B and CCS membership B go together. And again, these assigned membership A's and B's relate to what that top line billing number would be, whether it's in the 1.8 million or the 1.9 million. The numbers that you see at the top, the total billings here, this is the total billings minus the implementation amounts that are referenced in the relevant new library worksheet. So again, as our new members come in, they have a reduced rate until they go live. So we calculate their membership separately and then subtract it and apply our regular formula to everyone else. So you'll see on either sheet, Warren Newport sees a big jump because they had implementation rates last year. And then OCLC, as I noted in the summary, we've been using a self-reported value for collection spending to distribute OCLC fees. So every year we ask the libraries to submit their spending on physical materials and then their spending on downloadable streaming digital materials that are cataloged at the title level. And every year we have a lot of questions about it. And, we track for big jumps where it's like, oh, maybe a library reported it differently than they reported last year. But essentially libraries are doing a lot of math on their end to come up with this number that, is only a metric to be representative of library size and spending. There's nothing magic about those that physical material and which digital materials we include. We were just trying to get our minds around like, how big are these libraries' collections? So I looked at a lot of IPLAR numbers. Here it comes, maybe, yes. I provided you with the spreadsheet. I have no illusions that anyone spent a lot of time with this. But essentially I looked at print expended. What if we used, instead of the self-reported number, what if we used print expenditures? What if we used e-content plus print, which is like kind of like what we're doing now? Or what if we used total collection expenditures from IPLAR? And so I looked at some different values. There were some visualizations involved, but they were not helpful, so I did not include them. And essentially, I was trying to look at what is the least disruptive of any of these. And you know what? They're all kind of the same. The total collection expenditures is a little bit less disruptive. It does have two big jumps for our libraries, a jump of greater than 5,000 in terms of absolute value, but like one is going up and one is going down. What I like about total collection expenditures is that I think it provides the least room for interpretation on IPLAR. I think every time we talk about IPLAR, someone in the room will say, well, it's not really comparing apples to apples. It really depends on what people report. And that is very true. So I think, again, total collection expenditures is sort of the least amount of math that someone's doing on their end before they're submitting. It also, takes into account, we didn't want to just look at physical materials. If some libraries are making a deliberate push to e-content, and really shifting their spending that way, should other libraries that are still more print focused carry more of the weight? So I like collection expenditures for, those reasons. The disadvantage with IPLAR, the data that I'm looking at right now is 2021. There is just this lag in IPLAR data. Eventually the lag will catch up. I may be able to get 2022 data from Rails and do an updated version of this for governing board or just see if it changes anything. That is the biggest difficulty, I think. When we were asking for the self-reported data, we just asked for your last completed fiscal, so it just was more up to date. That said, I think the reduction in overhead for library staff having to do this work, and for us having to chase down the values, and the amount of disruption, I think it's a good change to make, and I would recommend it unless the committee has concerns. So this FY25 estimate, this is the same thing that's in the summary billing sheet. And I've highlighted here, again, like who would be seeing the biggest changes. I will pause here for questions. Again, I like the idea of pairing this OCLC change with the CCS, the lower CCS membership amounts. I know some libraries have these in different budget lines, but overall, if we look at the total change from 23 to 20, or from fiscal 24 to fiscal 25, all libraries see a decrease except for Palatine, who sees a $160 increase. So I like the idea of pairing these two changes, well, the lack of change and the change together. because I think it offsets the cost nicely. That said, we do also have in our list of potential uses for development fund a line that just says OCLC smoothing. So we could, for the libraries that see an increase during this change to a new billing structure, we could pay for all or part of the increase this year and then step that down over 3 years until the libraries are taking all of the change on. So it's kind of a lot to think through. So I'm going to pause and see where people are at.
All right, well, I'll pop in for a second here. So I'm just, when it comes to the OCLC fee, correct me if I'm wrong, is that based off of physical materials and the services that are rendered related to physical materials, or is it the records that are attached to all materials in our holdings?
So what we're actually billed from OCLC,
Yeah,
it is a historical measure of the number of records like accessed and downloaded, I believe, including a credit for original records created, and then also like fees and credits for interlibrary loans sent and received. But I say historical because those values were all calculated like 40 years ago. And then OCLC said, we're going to do flat billing now. And kind of like wherever your library was at that point in history, that became your bill. And then you just got increases every year. So at this point, with so much development and growth and change in our community demographics, the numbers are kind of meaningless that come directly from OCLC. So my favorite example is that before Palatine joined CCS, they were paying $340 a year for OCLC. And if Highland Park were a standalone library, they would pay $30,000 a year for OCLC. So that is why we redistribute, and why I don't have a really good answer of like, what's that metric based on? Because it's cataloging and interlibrary loan, maybe some other metrics involved, but like from a long time ago. So that's why like you'll look at these libraries that are really big now, like Palatine, when those figures were all set in place, Palatine was a much smaller community. So.
yep.
And for those reasons, I'm very much in favor of a more standardized process like you're recommending, Rebecca. I think if there's just one place that we can look at and we can tell new members or new directors to older members, just go, hey, look at your IPLAR, and this is where you pull that number from. And that's going to help you project. And even if it's different from how it had been done, I think that consistency across everybody makes a lot of sense.
I guess one of my questions about this is my community, it's my bias. Obviously, if you look at the numbers for Wilmette, you'll see that there's quite an aberration for us here. We do a lot of investment in digital resources, and a portion of the total of the digital is accessed through Hoopla and Canopy, where there's a high rate of engagement. Those items don't go back to OCLC. The fees that are attached to those expenditures are just based off of circulation data. So I'm just trying to figure out if the equivalency of adding in all of the e-content is a relative or fair metric when we're computing the OCLC detail in here. I'm trying to wrap my head around how that actually measures out. The print makes sense to me, and how that relates to the catalog. There are digital records, of course, as well in there, and that's a thing for us to manage, but just curious how that all balances.
Yeah, so we, in our current model where we ask for libraries to submit a number, we do include digital content that's cataloged at the title level, which again, kind of varies library to library, even libraries that have like, so for everybody that includes like Overdrive, right? But then some libraries that have Canopy or Hoopla is a great example. Some libraries that have Hoopla add a portion of those records to the database and some do not. Either way, like, again, the idea of consortial membership in OCLC is kind of wacky anyway, because only one library needs to get that record and then it's in there for everyone. So it's not, which again, makes sense why they changed from like a pay per search model to a flat rate. I just don't love the way they moved to a flat rate. So again, it's what we're looking for, or at least what I'm looking for here, is not necessarily a direct tie with OCLC billing, because there isn't one, so much as when we're thinking about OCLC, what are we primarily thinking about and how can we represent it? So more of like an avatar or like a placeholder or something than like a direct link. But yes, I agree. There are certainly some libraries that spend more on digital collections.
Other thoughts from the group?
I agree with Alex. I like a standardized model to the extent that we can get one.
Rebecca, when you do the self-report, like, again, this spreadsheet is so complicated that sometimes it's hard for me to understand what I'm looking at. Are you essentially
Mhm.
saying that the number you're getting from IPLAR is essentially the same number you're getting from the self-report? And if we use the IPLAR number, we won't have to do self-reports anymore, and that's the point of this?
The point, yeah, the numbers are not the same, but in terms of like percent of whole, they shake out to be similar. So we would not be doing a self-report. We'd be specifically moving to use the IPLAR data, and you would not do the self-report anymore.
So for Anthony's question about the digital, is you already had all that in the self-report, so it wouldn't actually change anything for you, if I'm understanding it right. Or change very little.
For me or for Anthony?
For Anthony, let's say for Anthony's library, because he has a very large digital collection. What is the actual difference for them, like cost-wise, by using IPLAR versus self-report?
I mean, it's significant. So under the self-report model, well, I mean, I guess it's not super significant. Under the self-report model, they paid $22,000. Under the suggested model here, they would pay $25,000. So $3,000 is not insignificant. It's not double. It's just, on the higher end of what we're seeing changes for, where we're seeing changes in member potential billing.
So on that column K is where you see the differences. The red ones being the most.
Yeah, the reds are all increases, and then the darker the red, the higher the increase.
Okay.
And so, libraries, I don't want to like pick on anyone, but like I know Winnetka, and Monica, you may remember this. I feel like because you had changes in your technical services department, the numbers we got from you, I think for like 3 years, were like, is this number right? Do you know this number is right? And had to come back and check because there was institutional knowledge and like, oh, we're counting this, we're not counting this. So it's just complex for libraries, and it's been on our agenda for a while to make it easier for libraries. Unfortunately, that requires, a hard year where there are changes.
I guess everybody already gets this, so I'm going to just say it out loud, and you guys can tell me how I'm wrong. What you're basically looking for is an easier way to get the same information instead of having to query 30 different libraries and then do back and forth with them all those times. So this is a tool that you've decided, or seems like is the best tool for that, to save staff time, save your time. And the differences are on here. I mean, what we report to IPLAR is what we report to IPLAR. You're gonna take that, you know, just as you take everybody else. I mean, this libraries, we're all incredibly honest. But
Mhm.
you just take that data and use that to split up the OCLC costs amongst all the organizations using the formula we already have. That's what you're saying?
Yep, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. I think that's totally reasonable. Sorry, Anthony. You
No, I
got
think it's-
3K more coming.
No, I do think that the formula and the way that we're developing this formula is fair. I guess I'm questioning the inclusion of digital records in there as being part of that total, or the expenses for digital resources, because it's not maybe the same as the print. And so when you were representing that other model that showed what the expenditures were for print instead of print and digital, that allocation seemed maybe a more equitable distribution, or relative to what we've historically been calculating, because the digital doesn't necessarily affiliate with OCLC completely.
Yeah. So if we're looking at this section where we're just looking at print expenditures, so what this doesn't include, and why I don't like it as much, is it doesn't include like it's literally just print. It doesn't include AV, it doesn't include other types of records. It's literally just print. So again, like, what libraries, you know, like, oh, this library still loves CDs and spends a lot on CDs, or vinyl, or whatever those other material types are. You know, that's not represented here. So like, I understand where you're coming from with that digital component, but looking at where can we get a standard value. You know, on the one hand, we have just print or everything, and
Is it possible just to do everything then minus the e-content? I mean, you've already, does that make sense?
yeah,
Just to see what it would be?
yes, let's see. Let me save a copy of this so I don't explode it. Okay, so I'm going to take this one, put it here, and then, oh, that's not what I want. Collection minus e-content. So I'm going to do total collection minus e-content.
Who loses out if we just do print? Is it just we pay less to OCLC, or
No, we pay the same to OCLC regardless. OCLC
Okay.
is getting their money.
yeah,
This is just like who is paying which proportion of our giant
Okay.
OCLC bill.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was afraid of that.
Yeah, no, OCLC doesn't care how, they're like, whatever, I don't care, just pay us the money. So if we look, so now we're looking at these numbers. So one thing I'm looking at when I'm looking at this is down here, I have how many libraries are experiencing a change of absolute value. So either going up or down, more than 1,000, more than 2,000, more than 3,000, etc. So we've got we've got fewer changes in the 4 and 5,000 zone. Our minimum OCLC, the minimum amount that anyone would pay is less. And the maximum amount that anyone would pay is less. So that's interesting.
Rebecca, what lines of the IPLAR did you guys take the electronic collections from? Because I know they report differently.
I would have to go back and look.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
That's a different worksheet. I'd have to go back and
Okay.
pull it out. So let's, if you look at the percent whole column for each library, in most cases, it's pretty similar. Yeah, again, so most cases it's pretty similar. I imagine that IPLAR will keep asking for total collection expenditures and e-content expenditures. Right, because that's another component, is IPLAR going to start or stop asking the question, are we going to have that continuing source of data into the future? Total collection expenditures seems pretty safe, that they're always going to want to know how much money you spent on stuff. So from my end, doing total collection minus e-content is not a big deal, assuming I'm looking at the right e-content number per Leslie's comment. I will continue to lean toward total collection expenditures because it's just one field and less opportunity for error. But you are the representatives of the governing board, and you are the ones who will incur these costs. And I am here to provide the information.
All right, well, I want to make Rebecca's job easy, and I also am concerned about equity and parity when it comes to analysis, and not just for my own specific organization, although, I am in that role. But when I look at how we allocate this, we try to get a formula that is fair and equitable to the whole membership and is relative to, I think, the services rendered by OCLC. And the part that I'm struggling with is OCLC really just doesn't have anything to do with some of the things that get swept up into this e-content category. And that's maybe the frontier that I'm kind of on a little bit myself here. But I'll go with the will of the group, and however you wish to proceed with this, I certainly want to help move along this conversation. But that's my lens when I'm looking at stuff like this. All right, so what step are we taking right here, Rebecca? Are we making a recommendation?
Let me go back to
No
my
one
sheet.
additional meetings, but is this something we should maybe sit on for a week and then come back in a few days?
I would like to know what they're pulling, and I think other people might have that same question of what they're pulling the data from. Is it just those that are marked as downloadables, or are they all e-content?
Yeah, I can attempt to pull it up now. Guys, don't look at my file structure. It's a mess. So Every once in a while Excel freezes when I open one of these because it gets real mad. Okay, so you are looking at Mhm. 195. So I'm looking at column 195. Mm, which electronic materials, ebooks, databases, etc. IPLAR question 10.2 for 2021.
So there's a lot of stuff, yeah, that doesn't get counted, that you wouldn't use, that you wouldn't have in the catalog, that's getting swept up in there. Compared to like, I think just like the downloadable, you know,
Mhm. I mean, all of these are imperfect for sure. Um, so we're essentially looking at either using 10.3 or 10.1 plus 10.2. No, 10.1 plus 10.3.
I would think that 10.1 and 10.3 added up would be a fairly accurate number.
So when you're filling out the IPLAR, and it says other materials, are you including literally all the other things?
Yeah, that would be like the library
Yeah.
of types,
Yeah.
Library of
as well
Yeah,
as,
board games.
games,
Yeah.
puzzles.
Mhm.
So we're just essentially trying to figure out a way to split up the OCLC. We get a flat fee from OCLC for all the libraries. And we're just trying to find an equitable way to split it up. And so
Yes.
I don't care what we do, as long as it's equitable. And I mean, you could just pull numbers from a hat, as far as I'm concerned, and like, as long as it's, equitable. And so we decided to, at one point, many years ago, I'm assuming, we decided to latch onto collections expenditure because like it makes more sense that you pay more to OCLC if you have a higher collection budget because you're more likely to use it, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So for me, 10.1, 10.3 makes the most sense.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, it means like Villa's paying more, and then I think we should put all on ECA. Well, Matt,
What would be the simplest method for CCS staff to
Yeah.
do this on an ongoing basis? Because I think you're right, Rebecca. None of these are perfect solution. And one of the reasons we're looking to do this, not only to standardize calculations, but to take some of the workload off of our staff. And I know that I'm always one of the late comers and you guys are always bugging me. It's like, oh, you forgot the deadline again. Like, yes,
Not
I know.
just you, Alex.
Yeah, right. But so if we're doing this, we might as well do it in a way that reduces the workload for CCS staff, as much as possible and simplifies it as well. So what would be the easiest method? And I gotta think it's just taking it from one column instead of having to create another cell with formulas and whatever.
It truly does not matter. Like, it is marginally easier to use one number rather than two. It's not a big deal either way. The hardest part is going in and finding the right column, and the right columns are right next to each other. So, again, truly does not matter. What I popped into this column over here, this column U, is just the difference of if we use e-content versus if we don't use e-content. So if we do use e-content, the positive values here are paying more than if we don't use e-content. Let me pop in. It's not super helpful. Nope, still not helpful.
I also think throughout the last few years, how they've calculated print and IPLAR calculated print and non like AV materials has been standardized, where e-content seems to change. Different things get put in different categories every year. So they seem to redo that worksheet. So I think there's a lot of change in how IPLAR counts that might affect us without us knowing, if we were to use the e-content number instead of the print and the AV or other items category.
Rebecca, you had mentioned something about some libraries having a lot of e-content listed in Polaris and others not having as much. Does that seem like a pretty big variable there? In other words, is
so it wouldn't be a variable in this proposed model, because we're just looking at spending as opposed to like our current method. The current method, you only report your spending to me if your library has elected to catalog it at the title level. So that's, I think, where a lot of the questions come in. It's like, well, are we doing this? I thought I'm marked on this sheet, but I don't think we're adding those, and kind of like that back and forth. And that was specifically done because of these questions of like, well, you know, e-content's not really cataloged, so why would we be charged for this non-cataloged stuff? I'm very comfortable saying, you know, collection spending minus all e-content, if this committee is comfortable with that. Again, we wanted to, I don't know if this is the case, right? But e-content is e-content more used by more affluent communities? And so then are more affluent communities paying less for the same service? I mean, less relatively, I guess, because, you know, their community has access to e-readers and high-speed internet and all these other things. How much of an issue is that within the CCS service area? You know,
yeah.
There are certainly discrepancies, but I don't think they're as big as if we looked across other parts of the state. So that is why we did want to have some e-content components included. You know, like if a library was like, I'm going to be all digital, like, again, none of our libraries are doing that. This is a bizarre edge case. Like, would they still have an OCLC membership? Probably, if they wanted their material to be discoverable in one place.
So has Wilmette's fee now increased to $5,700?
So the 5,700 here is the difference that Wilmette would pay under using e-content or not using e-content. And again, to Anthony's point, it's not just about Wilmette. Like, I fully hear Anthony that he's not just like, how can Wilmette pay the least? That's never been my impression of his comments.
Like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a significant difference for some of these libraries.
That's just rough. Yeah.
And not so significant for others. So
Yeah, it looks like with this model, Anthony and I would have the biggest increases. Is that what I'm seeing?
With
this difference between using e-content and not, right?
well, so
Or we have the biggest
Monica,
difference in price, I mean.
Yeah, so Monica, you would see a decrease in both
Yep.
scenarios. So you would see
Yep.
an overall decrease. But yes, how much the decrease is or increase. Yeah, it does look like you two would be the most affected, which again, like you have really big collection budgets. So in general,
Yeah,
you know, yeah, and Wilmette's changes, again, I know Anthony, you're not speaking specifically about like Wilmette's changes, but when we're looking at why is one library seeing bigger changes versus smaller changes, just overall, Winnetka makes up a larger proportion of all of the collection spending, regardless of which model we look at. So any changes are going to
Yep.
be kind of at like a higher magnitude than like, you know, Morton Grove, who's at 1% versus 6%. The same with Northbrook. Although interestingly, their difference is pretty minimal. So, again, either of these, like truly any move to an IPLAR number, like makes my life easier and your staff because they don't have to go digging for this other information. So I'm hearing that e-content is not as consistently reported in IPLAR, but you know, Leslie is saying the questions change what they want to include, so that could cause fluctuations. I think it's a very reasonable compromise if like the library of things and other types of content in other costs are included instead of just print.
That seems fair to me.
yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
fan of that model as well. So that would be 10.1 plus 10.3, right?
Yes, I don't want to use those specific numbers because the numbers might change.
Right.
IPLAR. We can finesse that if you want, but for today's meeting, if we're comfortable, I'd like to have motions to recommend the budget to executive committee and recommend the billings to executive committee, or to governing board on both of those. I have sample motions available if we're at that point. And then we also have the list of potential uses of the development fund to discuss, and that this committee approves it. We'll share it with governing board, but it doesn't have to be approved by governing board.
All right, would anyone like to make a motion for item 6? We've got two details that we need to cover there.
Before we make a motion, Rebecca, you mentioned smoothing as part of the development. Is that something we could bake into this too? So for anybody who's getting a larger increase, that we could, because I think you set $30,000 aside or something for that. And that might be something
Yes.
easier to flow into. So if we can use that, do you know what you mentioned
Yeah.
that, right? I'm not making this
I
up,
did
right?
mention that. You're not making that up. No. So we have in the list of development fund uses, we had OCLC smoothing. And the original intention of that was if we were adding a new library and they had, you know, a really outlier of an OCLC fee that was going to cause big changes, either for them or for our members, that we could smooth those changes. But absolutely, we can also use development fund to smooth changes for this billing situation. So this is based on the metric that we're not going to be using, which is total collection expenditures, but like it roughly still stands. So this year, if CCS paid the increase for every library, it would cost CCS $20,000 out of the development fund. And then, you know, if next year we paid half of that for those same members, and then even the final year, a quarter of that for the same members, in total, it would be $38,000. And would all the libraries that would be like do a decrease would still see their decrease, and our libraries that are going to see increases would have some of that burden relieved. So we could include that or not. Again, the total value of the changes, and again, that's for everybody seeing an increase, including someone seeing like, you know, a $300 increase. We could set a cap and or like a floor, like, well, you know, anyone who's getting an increase of over $1,000 will pay the additional increase. We have the funds to do any of those things.
Well, I'm looking at Fox River Valley and other libraries that are less well-funded within our consortium, and they're getting a $3,500 increase, which is something that, you know, they're going to be down 3,000 or so within the CCS fee, so it's kind of flat in some ways.
Right.
But if we could do, I would suggest just a 50% across the board easing this year. I'm just pulling that number out of a hat, and then 25% next year, with the idea that way, like, people get used to this new system and they can budget accordingly with their 2 to 3 year plans if they have one. That's just an idea. I'm throwing that out to everybody. I'm not trying to prolong this meeting. I'm just trying to throw options that are available.
You just want to hang with us.
Better than strategic planning.
Yes. So yeah, the overall increases are interestingly a little bit more in this new structure that we like, which is again fine. But yeah, I mean, we can easily pay 50% of those increases for all of those libraries, again, or more, from the development fund.
I like the idea of helping people out.
So for somebody who's getting savings, let's say, you know, Prospect Heights, which is going to save $2,000, they would get nothing from this. Though
We'll like it.
For the easement, they save $2,000, but CCS would have taken some of their money and they're distributing to other libraries who are getting an increase here just because we're doing different metrics. My question is that fair and something that our committee would recommend, or is that fair, or is it just on the responsibility of the library? You spend this much money in collections, this is how much you should be paying, and we just recalibrated our system on how to do so.
I think it's fair. I mean, I think, again, it's the same number. OCLC is getting their money. It's just how we allocate it.
Right.
And if I get to save a little, I don't mind some of that money going towards those who are paying more. And it's not, my money's not going towards them. If we had this money set aside for this, I'm okay with them getting some to help them ease into that transition so they can plan, you know, a couple years down the road and increase that stuff so it's not as big as a jump as it could otherwise be.
I feel the same. I think it is equitable to help a library who has a sudden surprise in fee increases by reducing that.
The other option, which I guess is more complicated, but also is fine. When libraries ask me what they should budget for OCLC, I always tell them to budget a 4% increase. So we could cover anything over 4% of an increase for this year, and then let them know what it'll be for next year. Again, I'm happy to just do the 50%. I'm happy to do the whole thing. The funds are available in the development fund. And for perspective, if we paid everything, it's less than we earned in interest this year in the development fund.
Well, I think
I-
this is, tearing the Band-Aid on and moving to any other system is going to be hard. Kind of remember when IMRF went from 7.5% to 7.25%, estimated income. And that kind of raised all our rates a little bit, but they gave people 3-year easements and to get into that, get used to that payment, more higher payment. So for me, doing 50% this year and 25%, we can't vote for next year, but that whoever's on the board for this could be due next year, 25% or less. That's a fine, and that seems fine to me. Like what's the highest increase someone's getting is Huntley, which is getting $3,400 increase. I'm seeing on there,
Mhm.
that's more stomach. You can stomach that more when we're going to help you with $1,800 of that. And then you're saving $3,000 or $4,000 on the CCS fees, so that they're saving money. I feel good about the 50%. I don't know about other people.
I'm fine with doing the 50% or any type of easement. I think there's so many variables with every library's budget. So for the couple of us to make a decision on everyone's budget is hard. So whatever we can do to help that along and give them time to adjust is my vote.
I agree with that, and we're not talking, millions of dollars. I think this is doable for CCS and for every library.
That's true, Jim. I think about my time when I was director of Zion, and money was really short, and every penny count. And I know, like your situation is not very similar, but there are similarities. And so even $1,000 savings, like it made me feel so good. And so if we can facilitate that, now I'm up here in the hoity-toity north, so but
And we're all working towards the same goal. So I think that we can accommodate this.
Okay, and then the relative impact to the development fund for a debit of that amount, Rebecca, is fairly
It's
negligible.
13 Yeah, it's $14,000. So if we look over here, we'd be budgeting that for this year. Let's add a little. I'm just rounding up. So this is the difference. I mean, it's again a minor change. We're still within our ending balance guidelines.
All right, so based upon what we're seeing here, does anyone have a feel about making a motion? And have we discussed membership A and B sufficient enough to make a determination there?
The only thing I'll add, I'm fine with going with the flat rate. I think we need to make sure that we put that often in our communications when we're doing that. It's like, hey, we're keeping it right. And then especially next year, when it probably won't be flat, we can go, remember last year we kept it right flat. Because I remember, like, one of the things like my board president likes to say is, when he looks at his property taxes and when we talk about possible abatements, he's like, it's going to be $100 off of my tax bill. My tax bill is $13,000. I will never notice that $100. And if I do notice it, I won't remember it. And if I do remember it, I won't thank anybody. And then next year when you raise it, I'm going to go, why are you going to raise my rates? So I'm fine with, with all that. But I think we need to if we're going to do this, we need to remind membership early and often that we're keeping things flat.
Well put. Okay, would anyone like to make this motion?
I'll make this motion
Thank you, Mick.
in front of us.
Would you like to
Are
read that?
you?
Do you want me to read the whole
Can
thing?
you say
Okay.
which one?
I recommend the approval of the budget as presented with the library billings in the amount of $1,822,896. And B, do I need to do B now, or should I just do that first one, Rebecca? I
I was
also-
thinking we'd do two separate motions, but I'm open to being overruled and having one motion if it makes sense.
Anthony, would you prefer one motion for both?
I think I'm hearing consensus with the group, so I think we could potentially make this all in one motion unless someone really hollers at me right now.
And then I will add a Boolean operator of and, recommend the approval of member billings as presented, included updated OCLC billings using IPLAR collection spending less minus the e-contact, less the e-contact as the distribution metric. Library experience an increase will receive a 50% easement and the increase from CCS development funds.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Leslie. All right, so a motion from Jacobson and a second from Chikaki. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Austin,
Yes.
DiDonato,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Chikaki,
Yes.
Todd.
Sorry, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all for that spirited conversation. Okay, the next item on our list is the development fund list action.
So this is hopefully more straightforward. As a reminder, this is a non-binding list of potential uses of the development fund. It's required for our fiscal accountability policy to justify us carrying a balance in our fund. What potentially would we use these monies for? So updates from last time, I changed next gen products from innovative to say, or from other vendors. I added in Rails, Find More Illinois. I increased the potential cost of development for an analytics tool based on the discussions we had at governing board. And then offset cost of new library membership. This continues to not be needed because of the Rails new member catalog grant, but we have seen that that's a really strong impetus for membership growth. So we've got this as a just in case Rails can't continue to offer that. And then as we just discussed, OCLC smoothing. We smoothed. So again, this just has to be reviewed and approved annually by this committee. I'm happy to make additions, changes, remove things.
Are we anticipating any more libraries after Mont Prospect and Waukegan at this point?
We are expecting Vernon to submit an application for membership, or well, they've submitted their application for membership. We are expecting Vernon to submit their actual request in time for a November governing board vote to go live in 2025.
Right. And I assume they're already an OCLC member.
They are an OCLC member, and Rails I've already reported their interest in CCS to Rails to budget for the Find More grant or for the catalog member grant next year for them.
Thanks.
All right, any questions for Rebecca about the development fund uses? All right, I think we can make a motion then if no other question or comment. I'll go ahead and make that motion. I move to approve the list of potential uses of the development fund. And that's for fiscal year 24-25.
Second.
And Jim seconded?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All right, Beth, let's have a roll call.
Austin,
Yes.
DiDonato,
Yes.
Dombrowski,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Chikaki,
Yes.
Todd.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, do we need to set a date for another meeting, Rebecca?
I do not believe so. I think that your work this year as a committee is done. Thank you. Unless governing board has other instructions for you after their May meeting. We'll be sending out the request for committee changes in the next month or so. So we're always happy to have repeat members. But thank you for taking on so many big discussions this year.
Thank you for all your help in preparing it. Okay, all right. If nothing else, I will declare this meeting adjourned at 2:46. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody.